everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we talk about the week's hottest legal topics. We uncork them, let you know what's the legal topic, why it's a legal topic, and we're going to break it down for you. Up on this episode, we have the question of birthright citizenship. Highly politicized issue right now, but it is a legal issue. Why is it an issue? Where are we coming from with the basic laws? What laws are we using? And what is an answer? Do we have an answer based on the laws that we have? So we're going to talk about that in this episode. I'm Virginia Tehrani. I'm the CEO of The Law Unscripted, which hosts this podcast of the Legal Weekly Wine. I'm also the owner and attorney for Tehrani Law, LLC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. We're based in Maryland, and we operate from Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, and I've been practicing for almost 20 years. I'm a former prosecutor and a former criminal defense attorney, and now I mostly do personal injury law, but the law itself is fascinating, and I am so privileged as my co-host to have Dr. John Weil. He's the Dean of the Honors College of Middle Tennessee State University. That's my alma mater, and that's my father. He is a scholar and an expert in the Constitution, the constitutional law, the amending process, the founding fathers, the basics of our country. And I got to tell you, it's exciting. We haven't highlighted it much, but it's the start of a new year, and not many people get to say they do a podcast with their father.
With an old fogey, right?
Right. But yeah, this is fun. So I'm doing a podcast with my father. We've been around for 2 years now. This is the third year we're in. And honestly, I'm thrilled. I get to listen to and remember all of the conversations we've had before and get to engage on a really big topic of, who would have thought we'd be talking about something other than Barbies and, princesses. So anyway, it is the Weekly Wine, and we are doing a set of these podcasts all in a row. So you're going to see us in the same outfit. Dr. Weil was funny before. He was like, do I need to change ties? Let's get into different costume. We're going to have the same, but it's different topics. So they're a little bit shorter for us. So I have the same drink because we're still at it. I've got Alani. It's an energy drink. I've got the peach flavor. Dr. Weil has a Powerade, which seriously, of all of these years, this is significant because it is not a Pepsi and it is not a water. I know, right? That's why I'm saying I'm not drinking wine this early in the morning. Sometimes I can do it, but not today. But I have brought back one of my favorites again. So for those of you listening to these podcasts, I recommend again a Battlefield green wine from Morais Vineyards. It's technically Morais Vineyards and Winery. Absolutely lovely wine. We bring it to almost every party that we go to as a gift for the house and the party. It's very well received. So I highly recommend it. But we're going to get into this. Cheers, everyone. Dr. Weil and I are going to power through this with the Powerade and the energy drink, and off we go. Cheers. All right, Dr. Weil. We have one of the hottest legal topics of the entire U.S. right now is birthright citizenship. Legally, politically, it's been a hot button ticket because Donald Trump ran on the ticket of we're going to deport illegal immigrants. We're going to fix this immigration crisis. We're going to deport. And he believes, based on his election, that he does have a mandate, that's what I ran on. That's one of the reasons America elected me. The public has elected me, is to enforce my idea to deport illegal immigrants. But the question that has come up is different than the original ticket. And it is a legal question that is, who has birthright citizenship? Who is a citizen of the United States? How do they get their so-called citizenship? How do they keep it? And can it be taken away? So, Dr. Weil, I want to turn to you as to why has this become a question? What has happened that makes this separate from an immigration question and has brought it now to a citizenship question?
Well, Trump has almost single-handedly brought this up. There was a scholarly article like 20 years or so back by two fairly eminent political scientists who sort of did a thought experiment about, would there be a way, could you interpret the 14th Amendment in a way to mean something other than what it seems to say? So let's give a little background.
Yes.
The United States Constitution, one of its omissions was it did not provide a definition of who a citizen was.
It mentioned it, but it didn't define it.
Right. In other words, it required, for example, that you be a citizen of the United States to be
natural born citizen.
Well, actually, right. Right. The president has to be a natural born citizen. And actually, that has led to a little bit of dispute. Are you a natural born citizen if you're born abroad?
Which was
American
a question
parents?
of Obama, right?
If you want to get to, right. Well, he was actually born in Hawaii, which was part of the United States, but there was a question as to whether he was raised by none other than President Trump. There's a even more technical question, which I think 99.9, ivory soap consensus is that natural born would include people who were born through cesarean section, although that in some ways is not a natural born.
Or even surrogacy. I mean, we're looking at that. Or what if they were born on a base, United States base?
In 1857, as you know, and as I almost remember, right, Dred Scott, a slave, went to court claiming that he should be free because his master had taken him to a free state and a free territory. And the court could have just simply said, and should have said, he's governed by the laws in the state where he is right now, and left it. But Chief Justice Tawney, probably hoping to avoid civil war, probably just threw gas on the fire by proclaiming in Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857, that African Americans were not, well, he wouldn't have called them that.
Right.
Free blacks could not become citizens of the United States. They were not part of when the Declaration said all men are created equal. According to him, it meant all white men.
Right. In the original Constitution, there was the slavery section of how...
Well, there was a 3/5 clause,
exactly.
which itself is ambiguous. In terms of representation and taxation, slaves were to count 3/5 of a person.
Right.
Which, it's sort of... Which line of, person, that's a good thing.
Right.
But if somebody called me 3/5 of a person, I'd probably take offense at that.
Right.
Rightfully so. But they decided or the court decided with Tawney writing that blacks could not become citizens.
Which was just as a, spoiler alert, was overturned to make sure everybody's clear.
So Civil War, 1861 to 65, most people agree, not everyone, but most people agree that the central issue of the Civil War was slavery and different attitudes. Southern fear that it was going to be reversed, and the Northern fear that it would never be reversed. We continue as a slave nation. 3 amendments were adopted. 13th Amendment, most unambiguous, prohibited involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime. And there are some people who think that part should be eliminated, but otherwise, it eliminated chattel slavery.
And these were known, this was, by the way, known as the Civil War Amendments. So it's the 13th, 14th, and 15th.
There's 3 post-war amendments, 13 through 15, 1865, 1868, 1870. The 15th Amendment provided on paper, never really implemented till 100 years later, voting rights for African American men. 14th Amendment was sort of the critical. It's the longest amendment in the Constitution, has 5 different sections. the most important for our purposes is the very first sentence, Section 1.
Which you can quote by memory.
Well, yeah,
you won't, but I know you can.
I can. Okay. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So that provides, that's what we call birthright citizenship. And we're not the only country that has it. But it's not universally adopted. But its primary purpose, and this you could say maybe is on Trump's side interpretation. The primary purpose was to provide citizenship for people who had been former slaves. If they were born in the United States or if they were naturalized, then they were citizens. So it overturns effectively the Dred Scott decision.
Now, here's a question. It seems easy to me to say born. Okay, if they are born in the U.S., that seems clear, which is a different issue coming up. But what does naturalized mean? How is that different than birth? There's a naturalization
process, as many people know. If you come to the United States, you keep your nose clean. If you come to the United States legally, I should say, don't commit crimes.
There's an application
apply
process.
to become a citizen, take a test that shows that you have basic knowledge of what the Constitution is about, and take an oath to become a citizen, then you become a citizen of the United States.
So when we talk about naturalization, we're not talking about someone just residing in the United States for a certain period of time. Right. We're talking about someone who's applied through the law to become a citizen, has done the specific application procedures and process, and is ultimately deemed by the government to be a citizen.
Right. Okay. And, some attempts are made to make sure that we're not, naturalizing terrorists and that sort of thing, criminals. And Trump is absolutely right. There are policy questions as to what should happen to someone who was brought to the United States by their parents when they were 5 and were not born here, but had been upstanding citizens for that's the so-called Dreamers, proposed legislation. And there are legitimate questions as to, should there be a way that somebody who came illegally but has been here for 30 years and bought a house and established a business, if they were willing to pay a penalty and they are loyal to the United States, should they be admitted to? These are practical political decisions. I don't have any hesitation in saying that if somebody comes to the United States illegally and commits a felony, if we can deport them, I'm all for it.
And that's the law. That's the actual law that's been put in place. It is a crime. If you don't commit a crime, apparently it's just a civil fine. But if you do commit a crime, it's deportation. And if you come back after being deported, that in itself is a crime. So I agree. I don't have any question on those. That's the law. In my mind, that's the law that needs to be followed.
With one qualification, there's still some procedural,
Of course.
You should have to have a warrant before you break into somebody's house, particularly if they have citizens living there. You shouldn't use excessive force on somebody just because they're here illegally, that sort of thing.
Right. Our law still applies as far as the 4th, 5th, 6th Amendment, that if they're living here, even if they're not citizens, that they still have search and seizure protections. They still have rights to trial and processes.
And then if we can continue on the 14th Amendment a minute, the first section outlines three different rights: privileges and immunities of U.S. citizens. Well, you could argue, and that's been interpreted very narrowly, but you could argue these only apply to U.S. citizens. But the two other clauses, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So those two provisions apply to people in the United States, whether they're citizens or not.
Right. Those are not specific to citizenship.
That's right. Now, the one ambiguity in the 14th Amendment is, what does this phrase mean when it says not only all persons born are naturalized, but subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens? Okay.
This extra and subject to.
And yeah, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Now, apparently Trump, so the traditional understanding is, if you're born in the United States, no matter who you're born to, if you're born on American soil, you are an American citizen.
Right.
That is the most obvious, clearest. If you believe in, well, there's a little bit of conflict here. Sometimes if you go by the language itself, it's pretty clear. I was born in the United States. Maybe my parents weren't citizens, but I was born here, so I am.
Yeah, I was born at the hospital down the road.
Right, yeah. Exactly. Now, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, what does that mean? Long before Trump or anybody else, I have a book coming out now, and it's 8th edition, Companion to the U.S. Constitution. My interpretation is not unique. The standard understanding of that phrase is that if you are a foreign diplomat, perhaps you're in an embassy in Washington, D.C., and you bring maybe you either have a child or your wife has a child, and they're born in the United States, they are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States in the same way that you or I would be.
Because the foreign minister is not subject to the jurisdiction. That's
right. The foreign minister has what's known as diplomatic immunity. And sometimes this gets really dicey on both sides of the ocean. We had someone in England a couple years ago who ran somebody down on the road, probably an accident, and tried to escape. And I don't forget the ultimate resolution, but tried to escape by coming back to the United States because she said they had no jurisdiction. And we've had the same thing here where a diplomat will be involved in a car accident and they end up going back without any punishment. So that was a traditional understanding. Trump's understanding, as I understand it, is that if you're born in the United States to people who are illegal, then you would fall under this exception. But the problem with that would be that we couldn't prosecute someone. If I were born of illegal immigrant parents and I kill someone,
right?
Wouldn't I be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States? Absolutely.
Right. I mean, we don't just let you walk because you're not subject. You are subject to our rules.
That's
and
right.
Our laws.
And so I don't really see any out on this. I mean, the closest argument I could make for Trump so he wants to say, if you're born in the United States of parents who are illegal, we can deport you along with your parents.
He's basically claiming people who have assumed citizenship are not actually citizens. And those people can be deported as if they were also illegal.
Right. And that's scary. I mean, there are a lot of people in those categories.
Yes.
And, the closest you can come, I think, for making an argument for Trump is to say, well, this amendment was designed to deal with former slaves. It wasn't designed, original intent. But most people who believe in original intent believe even more strongly in interpreting words the way they were understood at the day.
Right.
And we know from the history of the 14th Amendment that there were some people who opposed this wording because they didn't want people who were born of Chinese immigrants to be citizens of the United States. And they did not make an exception. And there was opposition to the 14th. There were a lot of people, just as we are afraid today, or some people are afraid of America being overwhelmed, in the 19th century, there was an even greater fear of China. Think about it. They're
Fascinating.
5-10 times as populous as we are. And if we let one in and open the gate, we'll become a Chinese nation. And by the way, this gives me a chance to put in a good word for a movie that I have just seen.
Yes.
And I think that most people will be able to find this movie without having to pay for it. We believe
it might be on Hulu. I still have to double check.
And actually in our local theater, it's going to be showing for free. It's sponsored by Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I'm not a member of that, by the way. But it's called Bad Faith, Christian Nationalism's Unholy War on Democracy. And we've talked about this before.
Yes.
About Christian nationalism, and particularly white Christian nationalism.
Right.
Which is a notion that God has uniquely blessed and empowered white Americans to rule, or white Christian Americans to rule. And there seemed to be this movie of about an hour and a half has cameos by probably 30, 40 different spokesmen of this and scholars who have written about it. Many of these people seem to subordinate. They're more nationalists than they are Christians, at least as this film portrays it. They're more interested in American dominance than they are in following the humility, the grace, mercy, love, peace of Jesus.
Sure.
People may not agree with every part, but I think it's very well done.
It's going to be a fascinating film, whichever side you're on, to at least go and see what the point of view is, see if you agree or disagree.
Yeah. And apparently I think it was put out last year. It's garnered a number of awards, including Variety's, one of the 10 best films of 2024.
Wow.
It's more a documentary than it is anything. But
sure.
I think people on both sides will find this to be interesting. But, this sort of fits into this narrative, to make a transition back, that people who come to the United States, particularly illegally, but people who come here from foreign countries, which all of us did, except for the Native Americans,
right?
who I guess in their own way, millennia before probably made a similar trek. But I think it would be disastrous, if. What other, definition are we going to give of citizens? I really don't think you could have Trump's interpretation without a new amendment.
Well, I agree. I think it would have to be an amendment to the Constitution to further define. But here's my rabbit hole. When does it start? Are we going to set a year?
Well, absolutely.
As of this year, because when, like you're saying, our ancestors. So if we're talking about people who came illegally 100 years ago, and their children were born here, and then their children were born and considered citizenship, do we go all the way back 100 years ago and say, well, your family was illegal, so all of this time you have had illegal status because none of you could have been legal since you came here illegally and weren't properly nationalized?
That question may not be. You may need to rephrase it, because I don't believe that we actually had illegal immigration till like the last century.
Well, and that's the question is what is that date? Right. When did it become illegal? And do we go all the way to that date versus do we set it as of 1980? Why and how are we going to pick a date as to when this applies? And are we starting to trace the lineage back to that date and then declaring other people as deportable? I mean,
only if they're Democrats.
True, the left-wing radicals, right? But I mean, no matter what date you say, okay, it's just this last century, but it's still a date and time. And when do we pick that date, and what happens to those people?
more importantly, if you're going to give a new interpretation to this, are you going to apply it to people who were born here the day before it was adopted?
Right.
In other words, I'm not so worried about people from 100 years ago because most of them are dead and it's not going to affect them. But we got plenty of people in the United States who have been born from people who came here illegally.
Exactly.
And if you were to withdraw this right from them, that would be serious business. And
right. And I guess I'm not explaining it correctly yes, but then what about the children born of them? So if you say one's illegal, then that they can't give legal status to the next generation.
That's true.
So that illegal status would remain for how many generations? So in my mind, and I'm afraid to do this controversial analogy, but so please bear with me for the limitation that it is in Nazi Germany. And I'm not saying that we're Nazi Germany, nor that we're anything like their government. So please hear me. Anybody who's listening to this and not taking this out of context, is there was a point when they were labeling Jews, right? And it wasn't, they were stretching to, well, was your grandparent a Jew? Right. Where they started tracing lineage back to, further generations.
Okay, we have something similar in the United States. Laws that defined African Americans according to whether, was it 1/32 of their blood, which meant like even if you had like a great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather or mother who was African American, you were considered to be African American.
Thank you for bringing it back to a U.S. example.
Yeah,
so I'm not trying to
incite,
any kind of riot over what I'm saying. It's just, trying to think of an example of where the bloodline comes in and these dates that could very well bring us down the rabbit hole of, I don't know that that's really the intention, but I think my concern is a date. What are we doing? How do we, if we're defining this as they're really not citizens, what's the date? How do we pick it? And how do we implement it? And I think that would require a new law. I don't think it can be picked out of thin air. I think it would need to go to Congress. I think it would need to be debated. Well, both, right? Because an amendment is a law. So technically a new amendment, which is the force of law, but I think it would have to be added to the Constitution with debate, with consideration by both houses, with the 2/3 majority for the amendment. You're the expert on the amending process. Of the
states, yes.
So if there's a further definition of timing, of types, I do believe that it has to go back through the legal process and the court process and the legislative process, which is we've talked about as the power to make law.
Right. And again, do we really want to build on Dred Scott?
Right.
The only decision and there is a decision, by the way, decision from the 1880s. It's a Chinese case versus Ark, Young Kim versus. I should have looked this up, and I apologize that I didn't.
Supreme Court case, though.
Yeah, there is a Supreme Court decision in about the 1880s, which does in fact indicate that if you're born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States, and that's it. But the general progress of American constitutionalism has been widening rights, not restricting them. And if we start picking out, you're a citizen and you're not, yes, if you're here illegally, my own view would be if you've been here for 20 or 30 years, and particularly if you were brought by your parents, we ought to give them a gateway to citizenship. But I understand, one consequence of that is it might encourage more people to come in the hope that we do it later. So there are some problems there. But if we start, trying to ascertain, one person's more of a citizen than another person, again, despite what I think, I just think the language is so clear on this that if we could do a somersault and declare that this doesn't include the people that Trump says it doesn't include, I don't think there'd be much of the Constitution that we'd have left that we couldn't do the same thing with.
Right.
I believe in written law. I believe in written constitutions. And when they're as clear as this, I just don't see any. And again, unless you want to make that absurd argument that children of illegal immigrants can go around killing people and robbing banks without any penalty,
not be subject to our jurisdiction.
Yeah, and not be subject to our jurisdiction. Unless you want to go there, I just think it's pretty much airtight.
Yeah, and that's not to say it couldn't be overturned, because an amendment to the Constitution can overturn it. But I don't know how you'd get that majority.
No.
I don't see that happening, of getting that type of majority. But as we've discussed in prior episodes with other topics, including TikTok lately, would Trump try to overturn it by just a simple executive order? Well,
there's where, if you go back to this book on Madison, there was this discussion when the Bill of Rights, turns out James Madison, who's sort of the father of the Bill of Rights, was a reluctant father. He basically didn't think it was necessary, didn't think it would be particularly effective. But there's correspondence with Jefferson, and Jefferson says, well, one thing you've forgotten about is that if it's written down, individuals can go to court and the court can protect their rights. And Madison actually makes this argument when he introduces the Bill of Rights into Congress. And if somebody were to, if I'm not the son of illegal immigrants, but if I were and had been born in the United States, I would definitely hire a lawyer in a millisecond if I needed to.
Absolutely.
To say the language of the Constitution protects my rights there.
Right. And it is a fascinating time. I do not do immigration law, but many of my friends and colleagues do, and their business is picking up, as rightfully so, because this is a questionable time. But that is the legal analysis of it. So we're not talking about deportation. We're not talking about the politicized views, even though it is a political topic. But hopefully our discussion today has given the original roots of citizenship, of where it came from, why it's being discussed, what the definitions are and aren't, for you to make your own views. Please feel free to comment, but we always ask, please make it respectful. We do not mind if you have different opinions. Everybody should have their own opinion. We highly support that, especially being from educational and academician backgrounds. But please feel free. I'm trying to respond to everybody as I can, but we like it respectful. Please know curse words. It's not, we don't think that that's beneficial for anyone. Feel free to like and subscribe our channel so you can catch our next podcast. Go back and see our others. Check out thelawunscripted.com. We're the company that supports this podcast, and we also have bar preparation materials. So we're in January of 2025, and we know that the next bar exam is coming up in February. So we do have study materials, from lectures to hypotheticals to outlines that law students can purchase. We also, for those not taking the bar exam, we have some fun merchandise. So go check out our merch, see if you'd like to get something. And in the meantime, I guess we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.